think a lot of folks would say that intonation is one of the most daunting things to cover. Sometimes we struggle to know exactly what's going on, and then we have to struggle with the ensemble not knowing or not having the ability to fix it. How do you deal with intonation issues in rehearsal?
You're exactly right. It's complex. And I think one of the interesting things is that a lot of times intonation it can be a vocal problem. For instance, there are certain places in the voice where the voice is transitioning from one range to another, and there's certain co-relationships between that place in the voice and the vowel that you're singing, which will result in people intuitively trying to sharp the basic pitch just slightly so that it sounds more similar to the notes on either side of it. And you can imagine if that happens all over the place randomly as parts go through these places, then what you have is a sort of a sliding sense of tonality at best. And the net effect is, for instance, oftentimes if everybody is proportionally high in register in their tessitura, their average range, then the choir overall will sharp. So you'll go dramatically sharp on a piece of music, sometimes as much as, a quarter to a half step, which makes it then harder to sing, which makes the problem grow, and so on. I think the best way I could say to talk about intonation is I always build from the ground. I always build from the bass. Whatever the lowest note is, that's where I start. And the second thing that I add in is the fifth. So I want to hear the relationship between the root and the fifth first, and then after the root and the fifth, I'll go for the next octave, and then I'll insert the third into the texture. And I try and do that so that we hear clean octaves and associate the octave from the bottom to the top. And it's stretched a little bit acoustically anyway, because if we use piano as a reference point, then that's averaged out in order to make the overtones line up. The human ear is going to hear that slightly flat. So you have to work that little problem into place anyway. Insert the fifth into the middle and then line up the third and then listen for the overtones. And in my choir, that's quite easy to do because it's a male chorus. So all of the overtone series for the entire chorus as an instrument are easily within the audibility spectrum, and you can hear them clearly light up. You can hear the fifth light up beautifully on an oo vowel. You can hear the octave light up beautifully on an e vowel, and those are within the range of hearing. In an SATB choir, where the top note is much higher and the bottom note is generally the same as it would be in my choir, the alto would be singing an overtone of the bass voice, and the tenor would be singing, the tenor note would create the soprano note. So overtones, it's more a question of lining the overtones up with the fundament pitch because it's spread broader. That's harder to do. But I would start with the bass, and then add the fifth, and then add the third, and then add the tonic or whatever. Do them in that order. Another thing that you can do is selectively chord. For instance, I identify the places where I'm going to need to be. That's one of the things that I do when I score study. I underline the places or highlight the places where I think problems are going to come about. In that regard, Strauss' piece, he went from C major to A flat major to C major to A flat major to C major to A flat major. And I was interested in the G A flat and the E E flat relationship in those two chords, how in those chords shifted. So I just worked those progressions in a variety of locations so that I could go C major, A flat, C major, A flat, C major,
kind of like vocalization exercises.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I trained myself to be able to play those things. And then when I got them so that I could move fluidly between them, then I played them up an octave so that they can hear I played whichever component of it an octave off of the voice. So if I'm rehearsing the bass and the baritones, I play it up where the tenors are. If I'm rehearsing the two tenor parts, then I play it down where the basses are. I play it off octave so that they can hear those chord progressions and fit themselves in neatly to the overtones for both the vowel and for the singer's formant.
I see. So you mentioned how in certain situations the ensemble will sharp itself and just keep getting higher. The opposite is sometimes true, right? Also, where especially if there's they'll just kind of sag flat, especially if the accompanist is not playing. So how do we fight that? Either way, how do we fight it from shifting higher or from sagging as we go?
Well, I think the real secret to that is figuring out what the root cause is. And in some cases, the root cause is because they do that additive thing or that linear thing where they just read their notes across the line without actually understanding that if they're cheating each one slightly, by the time they get to the end, they're significantly off. Another one of those problems, another way to get around that is to rehearse at anchor points. Like I've told you that when I rehearse, I may take a chunk and then suture that to another chunk. If you teach them how to feel the pitch at the same time they perceive the pitch, then they end up getting a sense, a physical relationship sense of what the actual pitch is, independent of the additive effect of moving through the line. So sometimes they'll correct themselves when they hit those markers. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I do that, is they'll go from here to here, and then they know that this feels like this and this feels like this, so you now have a correcting context someplace in the middle. A third thing is to figure out what's causing the problem. So the business of sharping, for instance, is almost always a tension-related problem, generally in the throat and tongue. So you just vocalize that. You specifically set out to train them to work through that area of their voice and reinforce it with the piano when it comes by, so that they can hear what's going on. Oftentimes, altos and basses will run flat. They come to the bottom side of their same voice change area and skate along the bottom side of the pitch and recover flat. They end up coming flat. Oftentimes descending pitches will go too low. They'll not manipulate the vowel correctly. They'll not place the vowel correctly.
Will ascending go too high?
It depends on what they do, but the vowels shift. Vowels shift perceptionally. You perceive them differently in different registers. So like I mentioned, the vowel trapezoid, which you can find online, an ah vowel in a low voice will be perceived in your mouth as further forward in your face. When you move it up into your higher voice, it'll be perceived as higher up into your head and then forward. And they'll connect it in a straight line. They'll do a linear shift. So they'll go ah and change the basic vowel timbre, and that will drive the pitch crazy. And it'll do the reverse coming down. Oh, and the placement problem of the vowel in the correct octave changes how the pitch is perceived.
And there's absolute analogs in the wind world in terms of brass embouchures trying to get higher and completely changing what we're doing embouchure-wise. As a trombone player, I'm sure as a former trombone player,
I was never that good.
to get out, you might compensate and
No,
then
I do know
affect
what
the
you
pitch
mean.
just to get certain notes out.
Yeah, I do know what you mean.
Yeah.
Like pedal tones, you could always blow the pedal tone flat by over-relaxing and dropping your jaw too much, and then the pedal tone would just sag right out of sight.
Right. So the technique is changing in order to get the note out. I'd like to circle back to one more issue one other issue, in terms of partly because it's something that fascinates me, in terms of using the piano for harmonic structures when there's this issue of temperament. And you kind of mentioned how you play that little shift. So if you're trying to get overtones to ring and you use the piano, you invite the root, you invite the fifth, and then you invite the third, especially because that third is going to be high. Do you take the piano away and then you just kind of play it because it'll kind of settle down? How do you get those to ring if you're tuning it to something that's not going to ring?
Well, I don't. When I do that, I leave the piano out of that whole process.
Okay.
I show them how it works on the piano.
Okay.
So I'll push a note down without sounding it. I'll, like in the key of C, for instance, I'll play the middle C, and then I'll pop the C below and the double C below that, strike them hard, and they'll hear that C ring as clear as a bell. And then I can play the E above that and pop those two low Cs, and they'll hear that ring. And then we do the same thing. And it's easiest to hear, I think, on an oo vowel, and then on an ah vowel you can get it to light up, and sometimes you can get it to light up on an E vowel. But I start with my basses, and then I add in my fifths, and if I've got it, if that interval is in tune, then the fifth above the octave will light like crazy. And if I put the third in and switch to an E vowel, then the E just above middle C will light up like crazy. And you can hear those, they are a presence that comes into the room. And they're technically out of tune according to the piano, but they're in tune according to the voices. And that's what I'm going for.
And physics.
Yes, that's what we're going for.
So you'll set those pitches using your voice, you'll model it.
No, I give them one note on the piano.
Okay, and
then
then
I
they
show
build
them the
from there.
process, and then they build it from there.
Okay.
And we do that in relationship to scale stuff. So we'll walk up and down the scale and then isolate certain pitches on the return trip. And then we go back and start over again and say, okay, bass is on the fundament. And then so and so, whoever that is on the fifth. Like I said, it doesn't work anywhere near as well when you're stacked up for SATB choir, because the overtone of the basses is completely subsumed by the primary sound of the sopranos. It's just buried in that sound. But you can hear if you collapse the voices close enough together. So if you position them close enough together, you can actually begin to hear it. It just isn't I think one of the key problems with intonation is that I think people don't hear harmonically, and therefore they don't function harmonically. And the problem with traditional approach to teaching literacy is that it's note to note to note based, and it's isolated in structure, so that people don't recognize the note that they're singing or the interval that they're singing having incipient harmonic quality at the same time that it's clearly a melodic function. So what we have is we have essentially people learning to assemble a jigsaw puzzle based on only the shape, but not the color or the overall picture of where it's going. And I think just pedagogically, from a purely human standpoint, it makes sense to me to give people as many different anchors as they can possibly have. And it seems to me that if you teach a piece and constantly contextualize it in the right key, and you teach people to sing well on the notes that they have to sing, then you're building a body-ear memory system which acts as a correcting context for each other. You're still going to do things weird. They're still going to have, I mean, when they get tired, they're going to flat. Yeah. When they get tense, they're going to sharp. But those are different kinds of things that you can work at differently than saying this is an intonation problem. If it's a perceptual problem, it's because you haven't taught them the perception of intonation, of well-tuned. If it's a vocal problem, then you haven't taught them the vocalism. And if it's a problem of something else, then you've pushed them too far. Yeah. Or you're not they aren't warmed up enough, or whatever.
Yeah. It's a great variation on our role as a conductor of not teaching this person their part, but teaching this person how their part fits in
the whole.
To the whole.
Exactly. Exactly.